What's the scariest story you know that is 100% true? Last summer in my city, a 14-year-old girl was raped near a train station. After her abuser left her, she tried to get help and flagged down a vehicle and was raped a second time in the car of the man who stopped. Two complete strangers raped her on the same day. It happened only a few miles away from my house, and I still think about it from time to time. For me, I was walking back home at like 11 p.m. when I noticed this hooded guy behind me. I do what I read somewhere you should do and took 3 right turns in a row to see if he was actually following me, and he was. I managed to gather all my courage and yelled at him, "What the fuck do you want?" with the most menacing tone I could muster, and he just turned around and left. This is a hometown story that stayed with me. It happened literally right around the corner from where I grew up, maybe a 2-minute drive away. Judy Kirby murdered 6 children and 1 adult by intentionally driving the wrong way on a divided highway in an attempt to commit suicide. She had been hospitalized for depression, but had also just ended a relationship with her ex-husband's brother and was by some reports involved in drug trafficking and fearing an imminent arrest. She picked up her sister's son, who was celebrating his 10th birthday that day. She then loaded her 3 children into the car, supposedly to pick up a gift for the nephew. Instead, she went missing with the carload of kids. A short time later, calls started coming into 911 about a car going the wrong way down the highway at a high rate of speed. They made it about 90 seconds before a head-on collision with another vehicle, driven by a father with 2 children and another child along for the ride. The crash annihilated both vehicles. The only survivors were Kirby herself, and the child who was along for the ride in the other car. There were pieces of children all over the highway. She was sentenced to 215 years in prison. Hometown friend was tripping on mushrooms and saw a couple going at it in the back seat of a neighbor's car. Went in for a closer look and noticed he was actually witnessing a murder. Next day the house was flooded with cop cars, but never heard anything more of it. Serial rapist Mark O'Leary was caught in 2011 and charged with several raped. Now, none of these women's stories are particularly pretty, but there's one woman whose story takes the cake. In 2008, an 18-year-old woman went to police claiming she was raped. They didn't believe her and ended up charging her with filing a false report. She had to pay a fine, have a crime on her record, and get this, to stay in subsidized housing. They made her confess that she made the whole thing up. Her photo was later found among his belongings. I lived in an apartment in Marina del Rey, California. 9 years ago, just before Halloween, a 3rd-floor balcony was decorated with a prop of a dead man slumped over in a chair. For a few days, every time I'd come home I'd look up and think how cool looking it was and wondering why they didn't have lights shining on it at night. After a few days, people realized it was actually the resident of the apartment who killed himself. I was looking at a corpse thinking how cool it was. A friend of a friend was traveling in the UK and had to hitchhike. He dropped her off at home. The next day police came knocking and proceeded to take her to the station and demand how she knows this man. She finds out that the man had killed another female hitchhiker that same day and had her in the trunk at the same time he was driving her, the friend. For some unknown reason he hadn't killed her. She couldn't sleep and cried for days and her home was placed on watch.